It feels like a pretty momentous evening to be together, and I couldn't be more excited to be joined by Suzanne Spaulding, who probably most mentees participating don't know is a mentor of mine. So I met Suzanne when I was 21, so I've known her over 15 years, and she was so inspiring and motivating to me as a young woman in this field, and I know that all of you will glean the same sense of inspiration from her as well. I can't actually imagine a better person to be speaking with us about this really important topic of post-election resilience. So thank you for being here on a night that we know is full of all types of emotions. I also want to thank Rhea, who is joining as our moderator. She is a Girl Security mentee. She is a junior in high school out of California. Through Girl Security, she's also been associated with Project Cyber. She has an amazing resume. She has taken several classes at our local community college in the fields of computer networking, cloud computing, as well as IT security. She was recently selected as the youngest of the top 5 finalists for the Apps for Digital Peace, which is sponsored by the United Nations, which is absolutely remarkable. So congratulations on that as well. And we have really enjoyed getting to know Rhea through our program. She's been extremely active, and I think, Rhea, tonight your comments and insights, as well as your moderating, will be just the thing that all of us need before election day tomorrow. So I will zip it and hand it over to you, and look forward to listening in. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fiona. Hi, everyone. My name is Rhea Jethvani, and I'm so excited and honored to be moderating this discussion on post-election resilience with Girl Security. I would like to remind everyone that we will be having a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so if you have any questions at any time, please type them into the chat. And now, I would like to introduce our speaker for the evening, Ms. Suzanne Spaulding. Ms. Spaulding is the director of the Defending Democratic Institutions Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and previously served as the Undersecretary for the Department of Homeland Security, where she led the National Protection and Programs Directorate, also known as the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, to identify and address key cyber vulnerabilities in the national information systems. Ms. Spaulding has led the development and implementation of national policies to strengthen the security and resilience of critical infrastructure against cyber and physical risks, including those pertaining to elections. She is a member of the CSIS Commission on Cybersecurity for the 44th presidency under President Obama, which developed a bipartisan national cybersecurity strategy in advance of the 2008 election and founded the Cybersecurity Legal Task Force. In addition, she serves on the board of directors at Girl Security. Now, without any further ado, I would like to invite Ms. Spaulding to share her thoughts with us on post-election resilience.
Great. Thank you, Rhea. Thank you for that introduction. And let me start by saying thank you to Girl Security for giving me this wonderful opportunity to have a conversation with all of you tonight, starting with Rhea and then all of you who are on. Look forward to your questions and your comments and your thoughts on these important issues. And thank you to Girl Security for everything that you do to bring more girls into these conversations about our national security. Thank you to my dear friend, Lauren, visionary behind Girl Security, and the amazing Erin, Connolly, without whom we would all collapse. And thank you to all the mentors and to all the mentees and to all of the girls who have decided to participate with Girl Security in one way or another, and particularly those who just made some time to be with us this evening. So thank you, everybody. It's hard to believe we are finally at election eve. This feels like this election has been going on forever, doesn't it? And now we're finally the day before election day. And of course, we know that we've been in election season now for weeks, and people have been voting. I voted a couple weeks ago, walked up to my community center with my absentee ballot filled out and handed it in at the early voting place. But people all over the country have already been voting. In fact, I heard this evening that the number of people that have already engaged in early voting, it constitutes 70% of the total that voted in 2016. So it's really, really quite remarkable. And I want to come back to that statistic because I think it's something we should all take great comfort in, actually. And as we are anticipating, tomorrow and the days that follow that post-election period, we're stressed. We're all a little bit stressed. And that's understandable because there's a lot at stake in this election. Clearly, those of us who feel passionately about the outcome of the election, but also all of us who care deeply about the peaceful transition of power and how that will go, right? And that this be a safe and secure election. And then there are reasons for some stress around all of that. And so I thought I would talk a little bit about first, election security from the three angles that I think about it, which is physical security, cybersecurity of our election infrastructure, and then what some of us call cognitive security, or the security of the way we think about the election, the way our cognition, right? The way we think about it. So I'll start with the physical security things. The concerns, of course, are about COVID. Can we vote securely and safely when we've got this awful contagious disease out there? And again, I think what we are seeing is that with these weeks of voting that we've had, that election officials have taken great care, and that voting is safe, that they have made sure that people are socially distanced, people who are careful and are wearing their masks, that when you get inside, things are spaced. There's the plastic barriers are up, all of the things that they need to do to keep us safe. And then, of course, officials have been trying to look at the rules for elections and make it easier for people to vote by mail who don't feel comfortable, who may be at high risk and don't want to vote in person. And so all those things are, I think, helping us to have a safe election in a time of this coronavirus. There's concern about voter fraud, particularly around mail-in ballots, right? Lots of talk about how, there might be widespread fraud around the physical aspect of that voting by mail. And there, I think we have to take our comfort from our FBI director, Christopher Wray, who said in testifying to Congress that he saw no evidence of any campaign or operations to conduct widespread voter fraud around the mail-in ballots. And our officials as late as today who are saying they're not seeing any wide scale, any significant voter fraud. And we can look historically as well. The Brennan Center, which is a center in New York, associated with the New York University, did a study looking back over several elections, focusing on states where they had universal mail-in ballot. And they found that the amount of voter fraud was infinitesimal. It was not 1%. It was not 1/10 of 1%. It was not 1/100th of 1%. It was 0.0025% of fraud. So I think, again, we should feel reassured that the integrity of our election from that sort of mail-in ballot perspective is in good shape. There are concerns about violence at the polls, right? And there, I think it's important to understand that election officials, what they do is contingency planning. That's really their job. And as soon as one election is over, they're thinking about all the things they have to do to be ready for the next election. And a big part of that is planning for what if, right? What if the power goes out? What if we have a storm? I remember when I was at DHS, we had Superstorm Sandy all up the eastern coast, and it was right around an election time. They plan for these things, and they've got backup plans. They've got contingency plans. One of the things they always plan for is the possibility of violence, because over the course of our history, we've had violence around elections. And so they work with local law enforcement to talk about how can we make sure that our polling places are secure without having a visible presence of law enforcement that could be intimidating to some voters. And a lot of thinking is going into that right now, and has been for the last several months, and certainly for the last several weeks, about they are very mindful that they want to make sure that everybody can be safe and secure, but nobody feels intimidated to vote. And so they have those plans in place. I think in terms of there's concerns about possible intimidation and interference with voters. And there, I think it's really important to know that there are federal laws against this. There are federal laws against sending troops to polling places, sending armed men to polling places, for the federal government to send any armed men to polling places. There are state laws all across the country against private militias. It is a federal crime to intimidate voters, to interfere with voters. And again, FBI Director Christopher Wray and our state attorneys general and local law enforcement have made it clear they take that very seriously, and we'll be watching for that. So I think on the physical security front, we should feel relatively good, right? Pretty good. People are planning for this. Something may happen. Things, happen, but folks are preparing and they're ready for it. Cybersecurity, Rhea's passion, and mine as well. There too, I think we're in good shape. So my successor at the Department of Homeland Security is a guy named Chris Krebs. He has been working for 4 years with state and local election officials and cybersecurity experts and the wonderful people at DHS. And what he has said recently is, he said, my confidence in the security of your vote has never been higher. Our national security officials are telling us that from everything they see, they do not think it would be, that it's a realistic likelihood that an adversary like Russia or anybody else can hack into our system and change the outcome of our election. And so that's important to know. That we're in much better shape than we were 4 years ago. We still will have work to do, and there may be some incidents, but again, there's a lot of work that's been done to be able to go in and figure out what's happened. We have paper ballots now. 92% at least of the votes that are cast will have a paper trail. Really important for us to go in after the fact. If somebody claims that they hacked into our system, we can go in and verify whether your vote was counted as cast. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. We do worry about disruption from ransomware. That's where they lock up the system, because there are systems like those used to check people in to vote. But again, election officials have been thinking about this for a long time now and making plans and backup plans and redundancies. We've got sensors in place. We're in much better shape from a cybersecurity. Cognitive security is probably the most challenging. And I know that Girl Security has been doing wonderful work on disinformation and misinformation, and that's a big part of it. We do know that adversaries like Russia, and we know Iran recently, have tried to interfere in our political discourse to push the narratives and the stories that they want told, that serve their ends and distort our American political discourse and dialogue, and other countries maybe as well. But again, people are so much more aware of it now than they were 4 years ago. So the reason we are aware that Russia is still trying to do this and that Iran is doing this is because they've been caught, they've been detected, and their accounts have been taken down. And that really didn't happen in 2016. And so that is an indication. The fact that we know this is happening is an indication of how far we've come, and the fact that we are detecting this activity. I don't assume that we are detecting all of it or taking all of it down, but we are in much better shape from that standpoint. And then our public is much more resilient. All of you are much more aware of the possibility, right? That what you're seeing online and what you're hearing may not be true, may not be really coming from another American, maybe coming from another American, but it's retweeting information that is not accurate and not true. But we've gotten a lot smarter at that as well. And a lot of your teachers are probably talking to you about how to be better consumers, smarter consumers of information online. You've probably talked with your friends, and if you've used the resources that Girl Security has provided, you're much better prepared today to deal with those issues than in the past. Basically, what I've been focused on is how do we build a resilience, that kind of redundancy that we're getting in our physical and our cyber infrastructure, into our the way we take in information and process that information. If our adversary's message, and I believe Russia is trying to undermine our faith and confidence in democracy. They want us to give up on democracy. They want us to believe that the system is broken, and not just flawed, but irrevocably broken, that it cannot be changed, that it cannot be fixed, that it cannot be improved, and to get us to give up on it. They are trying to get us to give up on the idea of being informed, because there's so much untruth out there that we can't tell the difference between truth and untruth. And so we just give up on trying. And then we don't have that informed and engaged citizens that democracy depends upon. And so the way we build resilience against that, I think, is to work on some of that media literacy, but really fundamentally to be reminded about why democracy is important, why we need to fight for democracy, that it is under attack, that it is worth fighting for, not because it is perfect, far from it. We have lots and lots of flaws in our democracy. That's why we talk about moving towards a more perfect union. But the beautiful thing about democracy is its capacity to change. You know, totalitarian regimes, authoritarian regimes, they're very brittle. They can't change. They can't listen, be responsive to the public. They have to impose from the top down. And change is an existential threat to them. It threatens their holding on to power. Democracies have the peaceful transition of power, and we have accountability mechanisms for our institutions, and we are capable of changing. So what we all need to do, and this is why I'm now a big proponent of civics education, and I'm working on civic education as a national security need. I talk about it as an imperative for national security. It's something we really need to do for our national security, is to help people understand their institutions, how to hold them accountable, and how to be more effective agents of change. Because if we can believe that we can bring about change, as we ought to be able to do in democracies, if we all learn how and we persist, we can bring about change. It may be excruciatingly slow sometimes, but we can bring about change. Then when Russia tries to tell us that democracy is just a mess and can never be changed, we know already, we are inoculated, if you will, like a vaccine ahead of time for that messaging to say, no, that's not true. I can, and I know how to be an effective agent of change. So I think that the tremendously high turnout this election is an indication that efforts to get Americans to give up on democracy have failed. And Americans do believe in change. They believe that they can be part of a process, whether they're voting to keep the president in office or they're voting to put Joe Biden in office. They believe in the power of their voice. They believe in the importance of being engaged and part of the process. And so the fact that we are seeing so many people who have not shrugged their shoulders, but who are getting out there, shows me that they still believe in democracy. And I think that's a wonderful thing.
Well, that was what I needed to hear. Okay, I can go to bed now.
Excellent.
That was really wonderful, Rhea. You're going to take over, but I have to say it's to remind ourselves right now that simple but profound exercise of getting out and casting a vote or mailing one in is in and of itself an expression of belief in democracy. And I think that's a wonderful thing to remember over the next couple of days and so forth. So Rhea, take it away. Look forward to hearing the questions as well.
Yes, thank you so much for your insight, Ms. Spaulding. It's great to know that our election officials are planning for every circumstance possible, and that our civic engagement, as in like learning about different voting methods and just engaging in webinars like this by itself, directly impacts our national security, makes us believe that every person has some say in our national democracy. And I definitely agree that as mis and disinformation become more widespread in our society, especially with an increasing dependence on social media and more technological interactions with the COVID-19 pandemic, our national security becomes more and more threatened. And it's important that we ensure that our information is as factual as possible and try to ensure that our elections are as secure and honest as possible, especially since it is one of the main ways in which most people interact with our lawmaking policies and things like that. So thank you so much for sharing. It was definitely so insightful. And I think now we'll be getting into questions from the viewers. So I'd like to remind everyone that if you have a question, to please type it in the chat. And to start off, my question for you is that lately I've been reading a lot about the ethical algorithm and internalized AI biases. And given that people tend to have somewhat of a herd mentality, they can easily be swayed based on media and computerized predictions of what will happen based on the election. And how do you think that these new technologies are being harnessed to cause more vulnerabilities in terms of election security? And how did the impacts of AI predictive analysis affect how voters engage in the election? And also in terms of believing who actually won. So in some ways, does the expected outcome undermine the actual victory of a presidential candidate, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a really smart question, Rhea. I don't think we know yet really how it might impact. But what I would say is, I think with AI generally, with automated intelligence, artificial intelligence, we need to demand, I think, as Americans, greater accountability in the use of that technology. A lot of my friends and colleagues who are engaged in applications of AI talk about the fact that that how it works exactly is kind of a mystery, right? It's kind of a black box often. You put in a bunch of data and it makes these correlations and finds these connections and runs these algorithms, and that they can't really go back and reconstruct exactly how that happened. And I think for certain applications, that's really not acceptable. So, for example, if you're going to use it in any kind of hiring decisions or promotion decisions, or even, frankly, health decisions, all kinds of things, we need to have more auditability of how that technology is working. So that's one of the areas I think we need to be more thoughtful and careful in the implementation of this technology. In terms of how predictive use of AI, particularly, for example, in elections, might affect the outcome, I think it's too early for it to have a significant impact because not enough Americans know about it and understand it. And so right now, I'm not sure that it carries that much more weight than the things that have been out there for years and years and years that claim to be able to predict, based on a whole lot of data that they put together. Long before AI came along, people claimed that they could predict who was going to win the election. And I don't think that those things have had tremendous sway either. And then, of course, you have polls, right? And the polls that claim to be able to predict who's going to win the election. And I think those sometimes can have an impact on whether people turn out if they think their vote isn't going to make a difference. But I think we've had enough elections, certainly recently, where the polls turned out to be wrong, that people now look at them with a more jaundiced eye, and that skepticism may carry over into when AI starts becoming more talked about kind of predictive analysis, that people will bring that skepticism with them.
I just wanted to add, Suzanne, that's all really important and insightful. And I think it's something that at Girl Security, that's why we always start with a conversation about ethics, because of the need for ethical decision making, particularly in artificial intelligence, as for all of the applications that you noted. And I think too, Rhea, given your background, ethics is something that is extremely accessible to most girls. Even if you don't know what the word ethics means, you come to the table with a set of values that inform your decision making. And what the kind of experts are talking about at the higher levels is really no different from the type of decision making that all of you make as part of your everyday lives. So I think the ethics portion of AI and the ethical approach is going to be something that we need to emphasize more as part of that, placing more responsibility on those who develop and apply algorithms in the tech space. So really something to watch, I think, going forward and to engage in as teenagers.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yep.
Thank you. I think as we become more and more dependent on technology, like I said before, it's important that we retain that sort of skepticism so it doesn't completely take over our opinions. So it's nice to know that people still have faith in the fact that their vote is going to count, regardless of what a computer might suggest. And I think we can move on to our submitted questions from the viewers. So to start off, Kyla asked, what are your thoughts on the way that private companies are moderating disinformation and misinformation during this election cycle? And is there anything you would even further improve for the 2024 election?
Yeah, great question. That's so important. These social media platforms play such an important role in all of this. And I think they too were caught very much flat-footed. I mean, I think in 2016, they initially denied that their platforms could have much impact and downplayed the extent of the disinformation and misinformation that happened on their platforms. But they've come a long way as well. And they put considerable resources into trying to detect what they call inauthentic coordinated activity. So when say those, Russian trolls at the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg, Russia, when, are pretending to be Americans and weighing in on the American election, that they have ways now of detecting that's not really an American in Tennessee. And so that helps. They are working with our federal agencies, including the FBI, to use what foreign intelligence can collect and then look and see on their platform to find this outside interference, for example. The broader disinformation and misinformation that goes beyond foreign adversaries and is really about domestic voices is a much bigger challenge for them. And but they are stepping up to their responsibility to at least flag and that discourse around elections may be treated differently than ordinary everyday discourse, right? Conversations that are, particularly purporting to provide information about the elections. They've said the same thing with respect to coronavirus, right? That's a unique category of information that has such strong consequences for our health and safety that they're going to monitor that carefully and they're going to police that more intensely. And so I think they are, stepping up. There was a recent incident that came up, a story in the New York Post, which is a newspaper in New York City, that had a big story that was about Joe Biden's son. And I thought that the way that was handled ultimately also showed that we have gotten smarter since 2016, when Hillary Clinton's emails were hacked and leaked. And the media just presented it in a very straightforward way. These look at all this stuff that's in the emails, and didn't emphasize that it had been hacked by Russia and put out there to affect our political discourse. In this instance, when the New York Post ran this story, rather than all the rest of the newspapers picking up on it, which is what they normally want to do, they want to be the next first one to get the story out. They took a pause because right away, experts were saying there are indications here that this stuff is fake, that there may be flaws in this story, that it's not been yet fully verified. And so they took a breath, and the social media platforms took a breath. They paused. They stopped the spread of it before it could go viral. And that is so important. And that's a lesson for all of us, right? To take a breath. They say a lie can make its way halfway around the world before the truth can get its pants on. So let's take a breath and give truth a chance to at least get their pants on. So that if it turns out to be true, we can get it out there. People will know it, but if it's not true, it's really hard to pull it back. And so as we get things that come to us and we think they're amazing and we want to be the first one in our group to, share it. That's, I think so often we need to just sort of say to ourselves, take a breath and think about this first. And determine that something is more important, i.e. making sure that you're only spreading accurate information is more important than being the first one who shares it with your friends or your circle.
For sure. And coming from a cybersecurity kind of interest, I definitely see correlations with ideas of insider threats and disinformation, because I think if we ourselves as a country can't spread factual and accurate information, we can't expect countries like Russia and Iran to be our biggest enemies or adversaries during this time of election. So we need to strengthen ourselves from the inside before we move on and try to fix other external issues as well. So
yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay, moving on from Megan. She submitted a question in the chat saying, how can we maintain patriotism and pride in our country if the result of the election is not the one we individually prefer?
Yeah, it's really hard. And I will tell you, we're all sort of thinking about that because we care so deeply. And there is such a clear distinction, in front of us in this election. And so whoever loses is going to have if their candidate they supported loses, is going to shake those strong supporters in their vision and concept of what this country is, right? And so I think the best we can do is to pull back and again focus on our, what are the fundamental principles and values that we think we do share. And again, one of the first things I would grab for is the importance of voting and the importance of an election, that democracy still matters. And so I think we will, at the end of the day, find that there was a significantly larger turnout on both sides of this election. So right there, you have something that you have in common, which is, you thought it was important enough to get out and vote. And that is a source of pride in our country, I think, something we can be proud of. I think you will see also, people who will continue to engage. I don't think we're going to see people give up. Some will, of course, some will. Some will say, this was too hard. I worked too hard and it didn't work. But I think we are a resilient nation. And the topic of, tonight's talk was, post-election resilience. And you all know that resilience is that concept of kind of bouncing back. I often think of a palm tree in a hurricane. It doesn't stay standing. It's not resilient because it stands up and is not pushed down. It gets pushed way, it goes, the wind comes and it's bent way over. But over time, it straightens back up. It comes back after the hurricane. And I think we are a resilient nation. We've been through some horrible times. We had a civil war. We've been through the civil rights movement. My friend Brian Jenkins, who is a terrorism expert, reminds me often that of the number of bombings that we had in this country, domestic violence in the 1970s. We had a whole series of assassinations, including of the president of the United States. I mean, we look at this time and we think we're living through the worst, some people think we're living through the worst, most divisive, difficult time. We've been through difficult times. And we get through it. We are a resilient nation. And I think that's a great source of pride. I think fundamentally, we have to be proud of our capacity for change. patriotism is not about my country, right or wrong. It's not about thinking that my country is perfect, I guess I should say, because it's not. And our institutions are flawed. But we have accountability mechanisms, and we have the capacity for change. And I think that's how we have to move forward, even if we are disappointed in the outcome of the elections. We have to persist because our system is strong enough to withstand this if we don't give up, if we persist.
I really love that point, Suzanne. And our team was talking earlier, and I was sharing with them that I had been revisiting women's poetry from World War I, particularly, women's poetry, as well as the suffrage movement and African-American women's poetry. And it can be a really stark reminder of how difficult it was for women to make their voice heard. It's such the case that the only way that they could participate was to write words that really are still not recognized in most modern anthologies of World War I poetry. And to your point, the tools that we have available to us, yes, they bring with them lots of challenges like dis and misinformation, but they also enable us to catalyze communities, not just in the United States, but all over the world, towards social movements and social change. So I think it's to be a teenager during this time and this be your experience is so, I have such empathy for all of you because I can remember being your age and feeling that, things were so heavy and dark, but there's something reassuring about the fact that it's this almost constant struggle. It almost has to be that way because there will never be 100% consensus, which means that, to Megan's point, you can still love your country, but criticize it towards that more perfect union. So I thought that was just wonderful. I appreciate you saying that. And that's a great question as well.
And I think, we look at, I've been thinking so much about how great it is that Black women are such a powerful voice in our country, in our political discourse today. And it was, of course, it was not always that case. It was not always like that. Far, far from it. And election cycle after election cycle, Black Americans had to work hard, organize, work to convince people that it was worth turning out. Okay, we lost again. We got to keep going. We got to keep organizing. We got to come out again in even bigger numbers. Okay, we lost again. We got to keep going and try again in bigger numbers. And today, they are an incredibly powerful, Black Americans and people of color are incredibly powerful constituencies in our country today. And I think it's because they were persistent.
Yeah, for sure. And as Ms. Biota said, that as we as teenagers are more and more faced with these type of social issues, we see that Gen Z specifically has become very involved, whether it be going to protests for what they believe in or standing up against different ideas that they don't think are in line with our nation. We can definitely see that we are proud of the, like Ms. Spaulding said, the proud of the capacity to change. So I think that's a very great way for us to unify regardless of political party viewpoints. We can still come together and fight for what's morally correct. Moving on, so there was an anonymous question in the Q&A box for, are there any tips that you would give us on how to stay grounded during the seemingly indefinite counting period when we don't know the election results?
Thank you for that question. It's a really important question. Again, I referenced my successor at Department of Homeland Security, who now is responsible for election security. And he talks about the 3P voter. The first is plan, make sure you have a plan for how you're going to vote and when you're going to vote and all that. The second is participate. Think about volunteering as a poll worker, participate in that process. And the third is be patient. And he says, we may not know who is the declared winner on election night, and that's okay, he said, and that's really important. It helps, I think, to note that we've never had official election results completed on election day, never. All the votes have never been counted by the end of the day on election day. Most races, many races are not certified by the end of election day. What happens, of course, is that the media, using exit polls and then knowing, extrapolating from the results that have come in, they project a winner, right? If you think about it, if watching the election night, it's, NBC has projected so-and-so the winner. And so that's how we, think we know the results of the election on election night. And those of us who were paying attention in 2020, old enough to have been around for that election, know that it doesn't always work out that way. That was Bush Gore, and that took a very, very, very long time to work out. Went through lots of court decisions, and that took a long time for that presidential race to be decided. And that's okay. I mean, it's, we prefer to have a nice, decisive victory and be done with it. But we have processes in place for just these, occasions. And those processes will work their way through. There will be, in addition to the need to count ballots, there will be challenges. And I'm sure there will be legal challenges to the way certain voting was done, and there'll be legal challenges to whether certain ballots should be counted or not. And the courts will make decisions, and all of that will take some time. So I think what you have to keep in mind is this is the process. This is the way it was designed. This is not some mistake. This does not mean that the election's being stolen, that things are being rigged. This is the way the election is designed to play out. And we have all these processes in place for a reason. And a lot of people are paying very close attention and to make sure that it is all done according to process. So it will be stressful for all of us because we're anxious about the result, but it doesn't need to be stressful about is something untoward happening here, right? And there will be all kinds of voices telling you that untoward things, that bad things are happening, that the system is being rigged, that people are doing things they shouldn't be doing. And what I would tell you is I've worked with those state and local election officials all across the country. They are public servants who care deeply about the integrity of the process they're managing. And there are observers from both parties at every step of the way. And so I think you should take great comfort that the process is going to play out the way it should.
For sure. Like you said, the more stress we feel with the election night, it should be focused on more of how it's going to play out after rather than the actual security of our election. So it's great to know that we're focusing our energy on what's best moving forward rather than reflecting on what could have gone wrong in the past. So with that, I think we have time for one more question. So Carolina asked, with regards to a peaceful transition of power, what are your thoughts on uncertain results?
Yeah, so again, there's a long, complicated process that takes into account that we might have very close elections. And so people have thought about this for a very long time. There are all the steps that we go through to get those election results certified. As you know, what we're voting for when we vote is we're voting for electors. We're voting for these individuals based on our votes. How many of those people are going to go into the electoral college that are going to support which candidate, and that's based on how we vote. But then they are chosen and they are certified, and then they meet, and if they're still undecided, there's a whole process that can take it into Congress to vote. So there again, people have thought about this. There is a process in place. to ensure that ultimately, come January 20th, we are going to have a president-elect, and that person will be sworn in. And there, again, I think we should have confidence in that, despite the fact that there may be all kinds of crazy things being said by all kinds of people. And there may even be, I do think we need to be prepared that there will be people in the streets who are expressing their frustration on one side or the other, or both, and that there is the potential for some violence associated with that, just as we've seen with the protests in the streets about racial injustice, where people feel really passionately, and the authorities are preparing for those eventualities. And it's, again, these are things we have dealt with before, and we can deal with them now.
I would just add a quick follow-up on that question, Suzanne. Thank you. What are the signs that we should look for that maybe things aren't working within the system? And what are signs that things are going to plan? I think for me, 2000, I was very little. And so I'm not sure what I should be looking for. So I think that'll be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think, listen to responsible and respected voices, right? They're going to have insights. And I really do believe that whether it's people inside government or who are observing on the outside, there is such a deep commitment to our democracy. When people go into government, they swear an oath to the Constitution. They don't swear an oath to an individual. They don't swear an oath to their department or agency. They swear an oath to the Constitution. And the overwhelming majority of people in government take that very seriously. So there will be, if things are not going the way they're supposed to go, we will know. We will be hearing about this from authoritative people, from voices that we can trust, that will tell us. But again, I think it would be hard. I think it will be hard to pull this process off the rails. Okay, that's what I'm saying. I think there are lots of guardrails in place, and a lot of people that are watching and who care deeply on both sides of the political spectrum about making sure that this is done right. And so things might veer off a little, and we might certainly have court decisions that you or I would disagree with. I'd be shocked if that didn't happen, for example. But that is still the process playing out, the way the process is designed to play out. And we don't always get the results from the courts that we want. But that is the process, and we've all agreed that that's how we're gonna, that's how it's going to go. And there are appeals. If a state judge gets something wrong, it can be appealed to the state Supreme Court. It can be many of those cases can go up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And I think my sense is that Chief Justice John Roberts understands how important it is to preserve the reputation of the court and the trust of the American public. So again, I think it would be really hard for this to go too far off the rails.
It's very comforting to hear.
And then kind of just going off of that to wrap it up with the idea of authority, Sydney B asked us, when you receive fraudulent or interference reports pertaining to homeland security and or cybersecurity, how do you go about combating them? Or for better words, how do you filter through what is an actual threat and what is just a lie? Yeah.
So two great questions. So I'll take the second one first, which is how do I sort of try to filter through truth from fact from fiction? And my first thing is to look at the source. And I know the sources that I trust, and I trust mainstream media. I look, when I get up in the morning, I read the headlines in the Washington Post and the New York Times. I try to tap into the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times. Those are all good sources of authoritative information. They don't always get everything exactly right. If you've ever been part of a protest or an event of any kind or something, and then you read about it in the paper, you might say, that's not exactly how it happened, but they're not going to make stuff up. And, so finding authoritative sources that you trust. I follow people on Twitter that I know are experts in the field. And even then, if I get something from somebody that I know and trust, but it looks it's just the headline of an article, I never retweet an article based on the headline. I always read the article because, the reporters don't write those headlines. Somebody else writes the headline. And it may be totally, so many times, it has mischaracterized what the article actually says. So some of those sort of basic things, I think, how to counter the disinformation. Again, I've talked a bit about the public resilience and trying to understand the strategy of those bad actors who are pushing false information. What are they trying to achieve? And how can I keep them from achieving their objective, right? And that's how I think about countering it. But it's also this notion of not allowing this stuff to go viral, right? Don't allow it. Don't be one of the people who inadvertently spreads false information. Take your time, think about it, particularly if it just is so juicy and confirms what you always thought, oh, we finally got them. I knew those were really bad people. And now here's the piece that, the picture that proves it, right? That's when you really should stop and think, wait, is this too good to be true? I don't know how many of you have seen that. What's floating around right now, the latest is a picture of Joe Biden on an airplane, not wearing a mask, leaning in really close and talking to a woman. And then it's a picture of him. The next picture is him outside of a plane with his mask on. And the tweet is, oh, so you wear your mask outside the plane, but not inside the plane. Well, somebody found that the picture of inside the plane was taken in 2019, pre-COVID days. So those are the kinds of things that if you get that and you think, oh, we got him, again, stop and take a breath. And it happens on both sides of the aisle and across the political spectrum.
That's for sure. And if so much disinformation can spread at such an alarming rate, using the knowledge gained from education and our resources, we can also try to combat that by spreading the proper information to combat that. I think it's very important that we address those types of concerns with our media as well. So I believe that's all the questions we have time for this session. But it was really great to hear from you, Ms. Spaulding. I think all of us have a clearer picture on how to approach topics of election security and resilience post-election night. And thank you so much. And now I would like to pass the floor to Ms. Buetta for her closing remarks.
Thank you so much for moderating, and thank you to Suzanne. This is really one of the most wonderful events. I just thought the comments and questions were really phenomenal, and I think it's so important. Part of the reason I started Girl Security was a sense of helplessness when my brother was deployed in Iraq, and I started to recognize that the reasons we were there were not the reasons that were stated, and to watch that unfold into one of the longest multiple wars, was kind of the fight that brought me to action to do more. And I think this is really the kind of fight of your day as teenagers. Disinformation isn't going to stop with this election. Actually, we're probably just scratching the surface of it. So in many ways, this is kind of your fight. And, Girl Security is here to support all of you and to be able to spotlight the remarkable wisdom of women such as Suzanne Spaulding, who's a mentor to so many, and just a very important person to me. And so I want to thank everyone for joining us. And if you haven't completed the guide, I would definitely encourage you to do so. It provides a lot of insight into how to report disinformation, how to spot it, all of the different ways disinformation is employed. So check it out. So thanks for joining, everybody. And thank you, Suzanne. I really, really appreciate it.